Okay, so we've seen how to navigate to the forms in the Episerver portal here. Again, you're just going to want to click on this file folder up here. The navigation is a bit different than what you see when you're navigating kind of the public pages and the portal pages here. But it still makes sense. There's a portal, forms, portal.moody.edu, and then academic records is where we store all of our forms. So I've got the verification request form pulled up here, and I'm going to go through just a real high level what's involved here with just basic setup. The verification form itself is a pretty basic form. It doesn't require multiple steps. It doesn't have form branches, and the email output is quite simple. So I'll just walk through this one, and then I'll start to get to more complex forms in a bit. And I'll also run through some more of the settings area on a later video. Again, just to give you a view of the actual what the user themselves would see when they pulled up the education verification request form. This is it. This is the public facing form. This is what a student would see. They'd see this title, or the user would see the title, a bit of an explanation here. They've got different inputs here from the user. We're asking the user, obviously, to put in their name, ID, or last four of SSN. Quick note on the last four of SSN, the DOE and Family Compliance Office has said we cannot use part of SSN to confirm identity. I think gathering it here does not technically qualify under that sort of violation, since it's not clear whether or not we've used this or another piece of the information we're gathering. So I think that, and legal said it was okay. So we're asking for email address, date of birth, and so on and so forth. So it's quite a simple form. To look at the back end, this is the first thing you would see on Episerver when you were editing this form. You'll notice when we first pull up the form, this is the page that you would see. This is this is kind of the view that you would see. It's not terribly intuitive. You have the name up here. Again, because this isn't a page, you don't have the ability to change the URL. The form needs a house to live in. It needs a page to actually exist and be accessible. And so that's the page is where you would actually change the URL. This is just the name of the form. It lives internally in Episerver only until you put it onto a page. There are four options here. I generally would just recommend ignoring mappings and retention policy as long as retention policy has forever for finalized submissions. Content is really where the money is and the meat of the form is. You'll notice at the top it doesn't tell you a whole lot, but as you move down you can see we've got some other items down at the bottom, and then this is the meat of the form right here. These are called form elements, and these make up the fields or just text areas, checkbox options that the user sees when they're trying to submit their request. There's lots of tricks that you can use to create form branching, but this again is just a pretty simple form. A little tip here, you can actually see what kind of form element it is by the teeny little icon at the left. You can see this T is for text. All of these are technically just the same kind of form element, they just have a different name. You can kind of see that on the form actually. As you look here, you've just got a blank, a blank, a blank, a blank, and they're all the same. They're the same exact kind of form element. And so you're actually probably going to see that when you're creating forms, lots of repetition with the same kinds of form elements. If you want to create new elements on the form, it's pretty simple. You would just click Create New Element. But before we get into that, I do just want to run real briefly through some of this stuff here. So the form title is, as you would imagine, it is the title of the form. One thing that I prefer to do is, instead of having my form title here and my description here, I can't format the title, I can't format this description, I can't really format any of this stuff, in fact. And so what I prefer, except for this, and so I do use this, but what I prefer to do when showing the user the very beginning of the page, I will actually add a special form element called a rich text form element. which I'll show you how to add that in a second, but it's essentially the only thing I would describe, one of the only things I would describe as an output. It's not an input. We're not asking the student for information or to give us something. We're pushing something to the student or to the user. And in this case, it's just a brief explanation of the form. In most cases, in fact, it's going to be an explanation of one form or another. And so here you can see I've got this. A bit about the formatting is on the previous area. If I were to add a description, I can't add a URL, but if I use the rich text form element as my description, or just as the very first form element, and put in the description, sort of imposing the description upon the form, I can in fact put a URL here, which is exactly what we did. We've linked it to some of our FERPA policy information. But again, if I were to go back out, I can't, this description would essentially show up in the same area, but I can't format it. I don't have any flexibility. So I tend to use rich text areas instead of these descriptions. I highly recommend never clicking this box here or putting this here. If you want to test that to see what happens, you can. But it's a frustrating addition to the form that prevents students from actually submitting it. I could see a use case for the display page after navigation or after submission, but I've never used it, so I just tend to ignore that. This is very simple. It's just the message that a student or a user would see after submitting the form. So it's very simple. Thank you for submitting your request, so on and so forth. Sometimes it's helpful to put more information here that explains what the user should do next, or it gives them a time frame to just kind of set their expectations for the request. This is going to take 1 day, 10 days, 3 weeks, so on and so forth. Again, moving down the form, I recommend just copying these settings here. I don't know really what much of these do, and there's not a lot of utility to any of them, at least not now, and so I recommend just keeping it here. I don't really know what they do again, so I can't really explain those, but I have found that unchecking some of these boxes can break forms and make them difficult to fill out, so I would just recommend these 4 boxes kind of look like this. Okay, getting again down to the form elements, you can create a new form element like I've mentioned previously by clicking create a new form element or create a new element. As you can see, the first thing that pops up is all the custom form elements that have been made by ITS or by the web team for the donor resource area. I recommend ignoring these, all the way until you see color. You want to go down to where you see these blue form elements, the basic elements, and this is basically all we use for all of our forms. The most popular of these is going to be the text, number, text area. We also use the multiple or single choice and the selection. I've never used the range. Yes, the rich text is quite common, again, when you want to push content as an output to the user to explain something. The CAPTCHA and reCAPTCHA does not work. Do not use it. It will break your form. The address is not helpful. It's easier to just have them put it into a text area and say, please put your address in here, and the form will take the user input as a text area. It's much simpler. The only other thing I think we've really used is the file upload. Every once in a while, actually this form is a good example, we do use a file upload. For example, if a student wants us to fill out an Alaska education verification or a Canada loan form or something that's that the third party wants the student or the user to fill out to verify that they are currently a student, they can upload that there, and that way we gain access to the document electronically. They don't need to physically drop it off. We get the copy in the request, and that shows up as kind of a link that you can access. It's stored in the Episerver area. So more on that later, but that is another helpful thing. We use it here. We use it on the directed study form for a student to, as an option, upload a syllabus, and I can't think of another place, but I think there's a couple other areas we might use it. And that's it. That's just how you would add a form element. I'll go ahead and click on just text area to show you what happens. The new form element has dropped down to the bottom here. My form has detected that I've made a change, and so it's pushing me to publish the page. Of course, I would want to, if I really wanted this on here, I'd want to go in and make edits, and I'm gonna cover that in the very next video, how to make edits here, the different kinds of functionality that's available. Yeah, and so that's it for just adding a form element. As you add the form elements, again, your form is going to detect the change, and it's going to ask you to publish those changes.